January 1st is coming up, a.k.a. my least favorite day of the year. It's my least favorite 12 days of the year while everyone gets their New Year's resolutions out of their system before I can get back to my gym. But I get it. It's great. It's fantastic. It's great. The question is, why is it so hard to stick with our New Year's resolutions? And we know we should eat better. We know we should exercise. We know we should do all these sorts of things. Why is it so hard? It's because the spirit's willing and the flesh is weak. You know who said that? Jesus. Jesus came up with that one. Yeah. We get this. It happens all the time. We know it. We know something's good for us. Great. But then it's just hard to do it. We know it's not a great idea to eat a steady diet of yummy and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Not a great idea. But it's great. It's fantastic. I don't know if you've ever tried it. It's beautiful. The spirit's willing. Flesh is weak. We get it. That's just us, though. This is the human experience. This is just the human experience of life. So what do? What happens when we have these two desires, which are just mutually exclusive, both of which feel very authentic and feel very true? What do? What do we do when we're like, yeah, I need to exercise more and get healthier, make sure that I take care of my heart's health? But also, man, I don't know if you've ever tried the orange chicken from Yummy, followed by some Ben & Jerry's. It's good. I really want to be a good husband and father, sacrifice for my children. But sometimes I just want to close the door to my bedroom and not talk to them for about 2 months. I really want to be generous and help out in the community. But I also just want to spend my money on some other things that I want. And I just don't want to go do things right now. I want to grow closer to God in prayer and read scripture and pray in the morning. But I also want to stay up late at night and watch the last 2 seasons of Yellowstone. Like things I got to do. What do we do when we have these two desires and they can't both happen? Which one do we follow? If we follow the dictums of our culture and the sayings of our culture, the saying would go, well, hey, heart wants what it wants. Follow your heart. You do you. Be true to yourself. Those are the things we hear. We hear them all the time. And people mean with the best of intentions up until we get into situations like this. Because how do we follow our heart here? What does that mean? What are we supposed to do there? Again, I think I've told you this story before, but like when I was down at I'm not going to tell you which one of my former parishes before I got here, I was after Mass, I was in the sacristy, and this lady comes in, baby on her hip, right? She's just crying, which means it's going to be a great conversation. And she goes, Father, my husband just left me. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? And she goes, well, he fell in love with this other woman. And so he left. And he came home yesterday crying, and he says he knows it's wrong, and he knows he shouldn't do it, but he's like, I got to go do this. So he kissed our baby daughter goodbye, and he left. So we hear that, and we just immediately go, duh, what a scumbag. That's right. And yet, this guy's following the advice he'd probably heard since he was in 2nd grade. Literally, heard from teachers and adults since he was in 2nd grade. You need to follow your heart. Do what feels right. Be true to yourself. What happens when these two desires in our life are mutually exclusive? Which one do we follow? What are we going to do? That's the problem with the understanding of the heart in our modern understanding. In our modern understanding of the heart, there's just desire. It's just like, whatever you want to do, just go for it. Whatever you feel, just go for it. Luckily, we don't have to go with that understanding of the human heart. We can take our Catholic understanding of the human heart, which breaks down the heart into 2 categories. What Jesus calls the desires of the flesh and the desires of the spirit. Right? This is what Jesus is talking about when he says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. There's this battle within us, like this literally almost a civil war within us of desires. We started talking last week about those 3 fronts, so to speak, of the battles that we face. We face these battles against the devil, the flesh, and the world. When we talk about facing a battle with the devil, again, the devil's game plan for you is not to possess you. Whatever exorcist movies you've watched, that's not his game plan for you. His game plan is to deceive you. And most importantly, to deceive you by preying upon those misguided desires of our flesh. The devil doesn't sneak around and go like, hey, Elvis is alive. He's hiding in Mexico. The devil doesn't tell us that. The devil says things like, hey, I know alcohol was a problem when you were younger, but you were just in college. It's fine. You're good now. The devil says things like, hey, I know, no sex before marriage, but come on, that's pretty outdated, isn't it? Everybody's doing it. The devil says things like, gambling. Some people have a problem with that, but you won't. You'll be fine. These are the things that the devil whispers to us. One of the most powerful ways that he comes after us is to prey upon those desires of the flesh that we have. And by the flesh, again, flesh, and it's not saying that our flesh and these desires are bad and always sinful, but it's saying those desires are those base and primal sort of animalistic desires just for self-gratification, for food, for power, for wealth, for pleasure, just all those desires that we have. And what's been pointed out to us is that there's this war between them. There's a constant battle between them. Those desires of the flesh, but then the desires of what Jesus calls the Spirit. Those desires that we have for love, for justice, for truth, for beauty, for relationship, for joy, for happiness, and at the end of the day, for peace. Just for everything to fit together and just be at peace. That's what we started talking last week. What's that ancient saying? Everyone learned their Latin this week? Oh, okay, one day you will. This ancient Latin saying is si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, if you want that joy and happiness and all of those beautiful desires of the Spirit, that's awesome, great. Si vis pacem. If you want peace, prepare for war, para bellum. There's a true battle, this peace that we want, those desires of the Spirit that we truly want. It doesn't happen by magic. There's a battle that we have to fight. And when it comes down to it, it's that war being waged by the flesh. It boils down to that lie, that strongest lie, that the strongest desire we have should just be the desire that we go with. Those desires for food, for pleasure, for wealth, for honor, for power, all those sorts of things. But again, this is the question. Is that the way we should go? I know I've told you this story before, but it bears repeating because it's very emblematic of this. Okay, remember that day I was flying on a plane to Chicago, and you remember how I love talking to people on planes. This guy sits down next to me. He's about 35, very well dressed, and immediately just starts talking to me. Immediately shows me a picture of his beautiful girlfriend, tells me about his big new house, his great new car, great job up in Chicago. He's going to be a news broadcaster up there, huge raise. He's just like, my life is awesome, and I'm just like, great, stop talking to me. And then he has to keep the conversation up, and he goes, so, what do you do? I'm just like, great, this is going to go really well. I wasn't dressed as a priest. And so I go, well, I'm a Roman Catholic priest. And he goes, oh, well, that shut you up. That's good. He's like, but he recovers quickly. And he goes, so, do you like that? I was like, yes, I do. Is that all? And he goes, he's just very confused. He doesn't get it. So he goes, oh, okay, are you happy? And in priest school, what they teach you is when people ask you questions like that, you just whip it right back on them. So I was just like, are you happy? And he goes, well, yeah. I'm like, well, why? And he goes, job, house, car, beautiful girlfriend, all these sorts of things. I'm like, great, yeah, you told me that. That's not what I asked. I asked, are you happy? And this is why I don't talk to people on planes. This is where this guy is, just tears start welling up in his eyes. And for the next, right as the plane is taking off, for the next 2 hours, I hear about how this guy is just profoundly unhappy. How he has everything he ever wanted in life. Everything he was going for. And yet he doesn't feel fulfilled. He feels like there's still something missing, and he doesn't understand why. Okay, this is what it's getting at. Okay, these desires of the flesh. We have some incredibly strong desires in our life. Incredibly strong. But that doesn't mean they're always the most true. That doesn't mean they're the deepest desires of our heart. Strongest doesn't mean bestest. Strongest doesn't mean even the goodest. What are these? Right? Like it's the thing in our life where, we have some very strong desires, but we know just because they're strong doesn't mean that's what we need or should go after. Like, does anybody want to stand up right now and just admit that they have a super strong desire for alcohol and that's a problem? Anybody want to stand up and be like, I've got a pornography problem? Anybody want to stand up and be like, I've got a gambling problem? Anybody want to stand up and just admit that in front of us right here? Why not? It's very strong desires. It's because we know. we know. We know within us, yeah, there may be a lot of strong desires that we have, but that doesn't mean that they're the best desires that we have. What Scripture is desperate to point out to us is that those deepest and the truest desires of our heart, they're often being sabotaged by those very strong desires of what's called the flesh. That's what Scripture is trying to point out to us. There is this war, there is this battle going on within us. And when these desires of the flesh are out of control, that's when we lose. That's when we very much lose the battle. Can you think there's plenty of modern day examples of this where our culture just constantly contradicts itself. Again, it tells you follow your heart, but then at the same time, when persons follow their heart to ruin, you get things like the Me Too movement. This is what happens when lust and desires for power and control run absolutely wild. And yet we still tell people, just follow your heart. These are all those things in our life. It's even closer to home, where it's those things in our life where it's just the dopamine system in our brain, where we get hooked on things like smoking and alcohol and pornography and gambling, and even, our new favorite one, our phone. It's the exact same thing on every social media app that we have. It's the same system in your brain, the exact same system. What Christ desires for us is more. Not more satisfaction of all those base desires. Christ desires freedom for us so that he can actually give to us those deepest desires of our heart. That's what he wants for us. Okay, and again, this great freedom that he desires is not just do whatever you want. It's this freedom of when you are able to not only want the good things in life, but you're actually able to do them and to go after them. Is Megan back yet? Good. Anybody here play cello? No, because Megan's not here. If I brought my cello out right here and said, you are all free Americans, go for it, play my cello, could you do it? No. Why? Because as much as we love to tell ourselves that we are free, we're not. We're not just free to do whatever we want. And we know that. The point is we have to be honest with ourselves and admit that there are certain things in our life that hold us bound. The image Scripture uses is we're in a kind of slavery. And I know this can sound over the top. I know it can be like, Father, come on, this Advent, we're supposed to be talking about Christmas cookies. Let's keep it a little light and fluffy. But we have to be very honest about these things. Because think, if we weren't in actual bondage to these things, you could walk out that door right now and never overeat ever again in your life, right? Easy peasy. You're not held bound by that. If you're not held bound, you could walk out that door and never endlessly scroll on Facebook for any other day in your life, right? No. There's these things in our life that hold us bound. They rob us of our freedom and that freedom that Christ desires for us. The reason I bring this up, at the center of Advent is this very famous figure that we hear about in our gospel today of John the Baptist. We've all heard of J. Bappy. He's a great guy. Famously, we find him out in the wilderness, out in the desert. He's dressed in camel skin. He's eating locusts. He's eating honey. That's his diet. And we look at him just like a weirdo, but what is he doing? He's preparing. He's preparing his life for the arrival of the Messiah. He's preparing himself. And he doesn't prepare himself by baking cookies. Again, I love cookies. Nothing against Christmas cookies. He doesn't prepare himself by baking cookies. What does John the Baptist do? He prepares himself by this ancient practice that we call asceticism. And he's disciplining those desires of the flesh that he has. And he's inviting people to do that as well. The way that we fight this battle within us, if we want peace, remember, prepare for war, to prepare for battle. If we want to fight that battle within us, that battle between those desires of the spirit and the desires of the flesh, the tool for that battle is called asceticism. Usually we talk about that during Lent. The solution is not willpower. It's not just praying 52 rosaries every single day and looking at a list of sins and saying, yeah, I better not do those things, because how's that going for us? The solution proposed to us since the beginning is what we call asceticism. It's disciplining ourselves so that we experience that newfound freedom. One very concrete opportunity for this is for the guys. You can wake up now, guys. one opportunity for the guys. It's a very concrete proposal. We're going to start on January 1st. Okay, this thing it's an experience and it's a proposal of prayer, of asceticism and fraternity. It's this thing called Exodus 90. If you're like one of those uber Catholics, you've already heard about this, but you're hearing about maybe this for the first time. Exodus 90 is a 90-day journey. It's like a mini Exodus. You remember the story of Moses in the Egypt and all that stuff? Remember that's called the Exodus? Okay. Moses leads the people from slavery to Pharaoh in Egypt to freedom. How? By passing through the wilderness. Exodus 90 plays on that image of we have all of these modern day pharaohs in our life that we're enslaved to. Things like, I can't get off my phone, got a problem with alcohol, got a problem with pornography, I got a problem with gambling, all these things. It calls out those modern day pharaohs and says, the way that we fight that battle is not just by coming to church or praying harder. There has to be a true asceticism. And so it proposes that for us. Like some of the asceticisms that it proposes in this 90-day journey are to cut out alcohol for 90 days. It's to exercise for 90 days. It's things like not watching televised sports for 90 days. And I know just by the looks of some of your faces already, just for those 3 examples, you're like, well, that's kind of crazy. I'm not doing that. But that's the point. It's hard for us even to mentally conceive of doing that, much less to think, I might do that, much less to actually do it. But that just kind of calls out the need for it in the first place. This is what's at the heart of it, right? We want to love God, we want to serve God, but we're not free to do that. We want to be amazing husbands and wives and fathers and mothers and grandparents, but we're not always free to do that. It's my dumb cello example. I know I talk about this too much, but it's the example of if I bring out my cello, are you free to play it? No. In order to do that, it took me years of disciplining myself, hours a day of practicing, so much of that, enslaving myself to my Nazi teacher, Quinn, who would always tell me all the stuff I have to do to get better. But what happens when I go through that process? That's when I experience freedom, to the point that now I'm free to play the cello whenever I want. It's the same for us in the spiritual life and in our lives as husbands and wives, as fathers and mothers. Yeah, we want to be free to be the best husbands and wives and fathers and mothers we can. Awesome. But that's not automatic. It doesn't happen by magic. That peace that we want, it doesn't show up by magic. The peace comes when we get everything else out of the way so we can receive what it is that Jesus wants to give to us. The joy and the happiness and everything he wants to give to us. But we have to do the work, just like John the Baptist shows us, to clear out everything else getting in the way. And so that's the kind of the question that we can all pray with this Advent as we move forward into this new year. What is that battle of the flesh that I'm facing? What is it that I need to do to begin to discipline myself? What is it that I need to do so that the freedom that Christ desires to give me, I can actually receive that? Jesus does come. This is what we celebrate at Advent. Jesus is coming. He comes to give us all those things. The question is, will we fight the battle to receive what he desires to give to us?